r/AmItheAsshole for making my daughter repay stolen inheritance after mocking me. Hashtag chunk 1. I found the first forged withdrawal on a Tuesday afternoon while reviewing bank statements for my accountant. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. $8,500 withdrawn on March 15th, Sarah's signature on the authorization form. Except Sarah was in Barcelona that week, I remember because she posted 17 Instagram stories about it. I was there when she left. I even drove her to the airport. I told myself it was a mistake. A clerical error. Banks make mistakes. I called them immediately, my voice cracking like I had gravel in my throat, and explained the situation. The representative put me on hold for what felt like hours. When she came back, her tone had shifted. Professional. Careful. Mr. Henderson, we've reviewed your account, and there are multiple transactions like this one. 7 in total over the past 18 months. All bearing your daughter's signature. All for substantial amounts. 7. I hung up and sat in my home office, the same room where my wife, Margaret, and I used to review our finances together, planning for the children's futures, and I couldn't breathe properly. The numbers kept swimming in front of my eyes. $8,500. $6,200. $12,300. $7,400. On and on. My fingers moved across the calculator mechanically, the way they used to move through my job as a project manager before I retired 2 years ago to care for my younger kids after Margaret died. Total, $75,840. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Repeated 70 times over, made deliberately, with forethought and planning. The inheritance fund was supposed to be for all 3 of them. When Margaret passed away 4 years ago from cancer, her life insurance policy, the one she'd insisted on keeping despite our modest means, had paid out $340,000. I'd invested it carefully, watched it grow, created separate accounts for each child. Sarah was already established then, working in marketing, making decent money. But I'd set aside accounts for James, who was studying engineering, and little Emma, just 14 at the time, with her whole future ahead of her. The fund wasn't for luxury. It was for education, for emergencies, for the moments when life kicks you in the teeth and you need something to steady yourself. It was Margaret's legacy to them. Her last gift. And Sarah had been systematically stealing from her siblings' futures. I pulled up Instagram at 11 p.m. that night, something I rarely do. I'm not the social media type. Never have been. But I found myself scrolling through Sarah's feed, my stomach twisting with each post. There she was in Positano, draping herself over an infinity pool with a caption, finally getting the vacation a girl deserves. Nail polish sparkles. 3 weeks later, new Hermes bag alert. Handbag some of us have taste. And then, buried in her stories from just a month ago, a photo of her sitting in our living room, my living room, with the furniture Margaret and I had picked out together, and a caption made me feel like I was falling, family dinner with dad and the kids. Love how he tries so hard on a teacher's budget. Bless his heart. Hashtag proud of my pathetic cheapskate, hashtag provide and pretend. I read that caption 4 times. Then 5. The hashtags were there in her public post, visible to her 14,000 followers. She tagged me, my actual account, the one I barely use, in the mockery. All of it financed by money she stole from her siblings. All while mocking me for not providing enough. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Margaret's pillow still next to mine. I haven't had the heart to move it. Some days I still catch myself reaching over, forgetting she's gone. By morning, I'd made calls to my accountant, to the bank's fraud department, and to a lawyer. The lawyer was very clear, the signatures were forged. Sarah had somehow obtained access to my account information and had been authorizing withdrawals using a signature she'd apparently practiced from documents at home. It was fraud. Interstate wire fraud, technically, since some of the transfers had crossed state lines when she had money sent to accounts opened in other states. You can press charges, my lawyer, David, said carefully. He was a friend of a friend, someone Margaret and I had met at a charity dinner years ago. But I'm guessing that's not what you want to do. I want my daughter back, I heard myself say. The one I raised. The one I thought I knew. David made a sympathetic noise. Then you need to have a conversation with her. First. Give her the opportunity to explain herself. To make this right. Document everything. Give her a timeline to repay. Make it clear what the alternative is. So that's what I did. I called Sarah and asked her to come home for dinner. She was suspicious, I could hear it in her voice, but she agreed. She showed up at 6:47 p.m. on a Friday, fashionably late as always, wearing sunglasses despite it being nearly dark and carrying shopping bags from stores I knew her salary couldn't justify. I waited until James and Emma were upstairs doing homework. Until it was just the 2 of us in the kitchen where Margaret used to make her famous lasagna. Sarah, we need to talk about your bank account, I said. I watched her face cycle through surprise, then confusion, then something that looked like calculation. She set down her shopping bags slowly. What about it? She asked, but her voice had changed. It was smaller. Guilty. The fraudulent withdrawals. The forged signatures. All $75,000 of it. For a moment, just a moment, I saw fear flash across her face. Real, genuine fear. Then it hardened into something else. Something that looked like defiance. Dad, she said, you're being ridiculous. That was when I knew this wasn't going to be easy at all. Hashtag chunk 2. Ridiculous. I repeated the word like it was foreign, like I'd never heard it before. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Sarah, I have bank statements. I have the forged documents. I have a lawyer who's reviewed everything. She laughed. Actually laughed. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, usually when she was watching something funny on her phone, or when she was mocking James for tripping over the coffee table. But this laugh was different. It had an edge to it, sharp and brittle. Dad, come on, she said, rolling her eyes like I was being deliberately obtuse. You're 70 years old. 52. And you don't understand how modern banking works. I'm authorized on that account. I've been authorized since Mom died. You made me the secondary account holder, remember? For emergencies. My chest went cold. She was right. I had made her a secondary account holder. Margaret had insisted on it, actually, back when we were both healthy and thinking practically about these things. Just in case something happens to you, Margaret had said. Sarah should be able to access funds for the kids if we're both incapacitated. That authorization had expired 7 years ago when I'd restructured the account after Margaret's death. I'd removed Sarah as a secondary holder, I was sure of it. I could picture myself doing it, sitting at this same kitchen table, weeping while I made the changes because it felt like another way of acknowledging that Margaret was really gone. You're not authorized, I said firmly. Not anymore. I removed you in 2017. Sarah's expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in her eyes. Calculation. Reassessment. Well, the bank must have made a mistake then, she said smoothly. You know how they are. Their systems are ancient. You should probably call them and get it sorted out instead of accusing your own daughter of fraud. That's actually pretty insulting, Dad. The casual way she flipped it, turned it back on me, made me the villain for noticing what she'd done. It was dizzying. I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs suddenly felt untrustworthy. I've already called them, I said. They sent me a detailed report. 7 separate withdrawals over 18 months. Sarah, they have the authorization forms. They have your signature. My signature looks like a lot of people's signatures, she interrupted, her voice taking on that sharp, impatient tone she used when she was about to dismiss me. And honestly, I'm not going to sit here and let you accuse me of committing fraud. Do you have any idea how serious that is? That's actually defamatory. You could get sued for saying that to people. I stared at her. My daughter. The girl I'd driven to soccer practice 3 times a week for 6 years. The girl who'd cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke up with her. The girl I'd held while she grieved her mother. I'm not accusing you to people, I said carefully. I'm confronting you, in private, about something that happened. About something the bank has documented. And I'm telling you it's a mistake or a misunderstanding or whatever, and you're choosing not to believe me, she said, her voice hardening. Your own daughter. After everything you've done. After everything I've done. I couldn't keep the shock out of my voice. Sarah, I've supported you. You've done the bare minimum, she snapped. You and Mom always acted like you were so great, so sacrificial, but you weren't. You made decent money as a project manager. You could have done more. You could have sent me to better schools, paid for better colleges, helped me actually build a life instead of making me feel guilty for wanting nice things. The words landed like blows. Partly because I'd heard echoes of them before, in the hashtags of her Instagram posts, in the conversations I'd overheard her having with friends, in the general ambient resentment that seemed to have grown around her over the years. But mostly because they revealed something I'd been afraid to see. This wasn't just about money. This was about something deeper. Something I'd apparently failed to provide that couldn't be measured in dollars. The nice things you bought with your siblings' money, I said quietly. The inheritance your mother left for their education. For their futures. Oh, my God, here we go, Sarah said, tossing her head back. You're going to martyrize Mom now. She's gone, Dad. She can't care what I do with the money. And frankly, James and Emma are going to be fine. They're fine now. They don't need my help. It's not your help to give or withhold, I interrupted, my voice rising despite myself. It was their money. Their inheritance. You stole it, Sarah. You forged my signature. I didn't forge anything, she said flatly, and the conviction in her voice made me wonder, for just a second, if I was insane. If I was misunderstanding something fundamental. You're being paranoid. This is exactly like what happened with Aunt Ruth, actually. That hit differently. Aunt Ruth had suffered from early onset dementia. We'd noticed it first when she'd accused my brother of stealing money from her, accusations that had turned out to be completely unfounded. She'd simply forgotten her own financial transactions. By the time she was diagnosed, she'd pushed away everyone close to her. Don't do that, I said, my voice shaking with anger and something else, something that sounded suspiciously like fear. Don't try to make me think I'm losing my mind. I'm not trying to make you do anything, Sarah said, and now she sounded almost sad, like she was disappointed in me. I'm just saying that maybe you should see a doctor or something. Get your memory checked. Because accusing me of forging documents and stealing money is a pretty serious thing to do to your daughter, and I'm frankly shocked that you'd even suggest it without getting yourself evaluated first. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I have documentation, I repeated, but my voice sounded weaker now. Doubt had wormed its way in, poisonous and insidious. The bank has everything. Then let's call the bank together, Sarah said reasonably, in the voice of someone trying to humor a difficult child. Right now. We'll conference them in, and we'll get this straightened out. But Dad, I'm telling you, you're wrong about this. And if you keep pushing it, if you try to involve other people or go to the police or whatever you're thinking, it's going to damage your relationship with me permanently. It was a threat wrapped up in concern. I heard it clearly. But I also heard the possibility that I was wrong, the smallest, most poisonous possibility, and in that moment, I wasn't sure which possibility frightened me more. Chunk 3. I called the bank on speakerphone while Sarah sat across from me at the kitchen table, arms crossed, one leg bouncing with theatrical impatience. My hands were sweating. I'd replayed this moment 100 times in my head over the past week, imagining how vindicated I'd feel, how Sarah would finally have to face what she'd done. Instead, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unable to see the ground below. The representative, a woman named Linda with a professionally neutral voice, confirmed everything. 7 withdrawals. 18 months. Forged authorization forms. But as she walked me through the details, something shifted. She mentioned that the account had indeed been flagged as high risk because the signatures didn't match my known samples on file. They'd contacted me about it 6 months ago. 6 months ago. I'd received the letter. I remembered seeing it, remembered thinking I'd deal with it later, that it was probably just routine fraud prevention stuff that happens to everyone. I'd put it on the pile of mail on my desk. The pile that's still there, half sorted. Did you receive our letter? Linda was asking. Yes, I said quietly. I did. Sarah's expression shifted, just slightly, but I caught it. A micro-expression of relief. She settled back in her chair more comfortably. And you didn't respond to it, Linda continued, not accusatory, just factual. So we assumed it was a false alarm. We're required to flag unusual activity, but if the account holder doesn't follow up, we close the investigation. I didn't know it was flagged as fraud, I said. I thought it was just a routine security notice. There were 3 letters, actually, Linda said. The initial notification, a follow-up 6 weeks later, and then a final notice saying we were closing the investigation due to lack of response. 3 letters. I'd never opened them. I'd been drowning in my own grief 6 months ago, barely keeping my head above water with work and the kids and the endless, exhausting business of being a widow. Margaret had only been gone 2 years. Some days I still reached for the coffee maker expecting her to already have made it. I see, I said, and I heard how small my voice sounded. Sarah's leg had stopped bouncing. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Given the timeline and the account holder's failure to respond to fraud notifications, Linda was saying, our fraud department may have determined there was insufficient evidence of unauthorized access. If Ms. Sarah has been an authorized user. She's not, I interrupted. Not since 2017. I removed her authorization after her mother died. There was a pause. I could hear Linda typing. According to our records, she said carefully, Ms. Sarah was removed as a secondary account holder on March 15, 2017. However, her name remained on the account as an authorized third party until July of 2018. There may have been a system error on our end that didn't properly process the secondary holder removal. That would explain the authorization discrepancy. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, she remained on the account? I asked. If she was listed as an authorized third party, she would have had access to make withdrawals. The account holder, you, would need to have specifically removed that authorization in writing, and there's no record of that being completed in our system. The initial secondary holder removal may not have cascade deleted her other authorizations. I couldn't breathe. Sarah was watching me with an expression that looked almost like sympathy now. Pity. So she was authorized? I asked, hating how uncertain I sounded. Based on our records, yes. There would have been a question about intent, but technically, if she was listed as an authorized party, the withdrawals would fall into a gray area. They wouldn't strictly constitute fraud, though the authorization forms should have been signed by you directly. They were forged, I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. Well, we can't definitively say that based on signature analysis alone, Linda said. Signatures can vary significantly. And if she was an authorized party, the forgery question becomes murkier legally. I hung up the phone. I don't remember doing it, but I must have, because Linda's professional voice disappeared mid-sentence. The kitchen was very quiet. So, Sarah said softly, looks like there's your mistake. Bank error. Not me. You knew, I said. The realization moved through me like ice water. You knew you were still authorized. You knew the signatures wouldn't matter as much because of the system error. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said, but there was a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. I was just being honest about what I thought I had access to. If the bank made a mistake, that's their problem. That's actually why you shouldn't accuse people of crimes, Dad. Because sometimes there are explanations. The money is still stolen, I said flatly. You still spent your siblings' inheritance. The money I was authorized to access, she corrected. And honestly, if the bank didn't properly process the paperwork, that's not my fault. That's their negligence. You could probably sue them for failing to properly remove my access. It was perfect, in a horrible way. It was airtight. The bank's error had created a space for her to hide in, and she found it instinctively, like water finding cracks. Your siblings need that money, I said. For college. For their futures. James is 17 and getting a full-ride scholarship to state, Sarah said calmly. Emma's 14 and a straight-A student. They're going to be fine, Dad. You're catastrophizing. You spent $75,000 on yourself. I spent money I had access to, whether intentionally or by accident of the bank's system. And frankly, I deserve to enjoy my life. I deserve nice things. I'm sorry James and Emma's lives might be slightly less comfortable as a result, but they'll survive. People do. I stood up from the table. My legs felt strange, disconnected from my body. I want the money back, I said. All of it. Repaid within 90 days, or I'm pressing charges. Sarah laughed, that brittle, sharp laugh again. You're going to press charges for what? The bank made the error. They'd be the ones liable, not me. Any lawyer would tell you that. You'd lose. You'd spend money on legal fees and you'd lose. She was probably right. I could feel the truth of it settling over me like ash. And frankly, she continued, standing up and gathering her phone and keys, if you keep threatening me with legal action and police and all this drama, I'm not going to maintain a relationship with you. I think that's fair. You're choosing money over your daughter. That's on you. She walked toward the door. Sarah, I started. Don't, she said, not turning around. I think you should go see that doctor, Dad. Get your memory checked. Because something is really wrong with you if you think this is the way to handle family conflict. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her visit, empty coffee mugs, the chair she'd been sitting in. And I realized with mounting horror that she'd outsmarted me. Not through some elaborate scheme, but by accident, through my own negligence and the bank's bureaucratic failure. And she knew it. #Chunk4. I sat in Dr. Patel's office on a Tuesday afternoon, trying to explain a situation that sounded increasingly absurd the more I attempted to articulate it. She listened without interrupting, her pen making occasional notes on the legal pad in her lap. The office smelled like vanilla and something clinical, the kind of smell that's meant to be calming but only makes you more aware that you're in a place designed to treat people who are falling apart. So the bank made an error, Dr. Patel said finally, setting down her pen. They failed to properly remove your daughter's authorization, and she accessed funds using that authorization. Yes, I said. But she knew. I'm certain she knew. How do you know that? I tried to explain the look on her face, the way she'd smiled, the precision with which she'd cited the bank's negligence. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. It's possible, she said. It's also possible that she accessed the account, found she could, and decided retroactively to justify it based on whatever authorization remained. People are very creative at rationalizing their own behavior. This was not reassuring. What Dr. Patel was describing sounded, if anything, worse, not a calculated scheme but a willingness to exploit a mistake and then construct a narrative around it. A kind of moral flexibility that worried me more than premeditation would have. The point is, Dr. Patel continued, legally, you appear to be in a weak position. And emotionally, you're now in an even more complicated one. Your daughter may have committed something unethical. But proving it crossed into actual crime will be difficult. I'd already consulted with a lawyer, a grim consultation on Thursday morning with a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in white-collar crime and family disputes. The assessment had been mercifully brief. I could potentially pursue civil action against the bank, but criminal charges against Sarah were unlikely to stick. The bank's error, while infuriating, created exactly the kind of legal ambiguity that defense attorneys dream about. The bank bears liability, Patricia had said, making a tent of her fingers on her desk. They had a duty to properly process account authorization changes. Their failure to do so, combined with the fact that your daughter was technically still listed as an authorized party in their system, makes this a civil matter, not a criminal one. You could sue the bank. You could attempt to recover the funds through civil court. But honestly, the bank's insurance will cover most of it, and your daughter's lawyer will argue, with some merit, that she reasonably believed she had authorization. What about the forged signatures? I'd asked. Patricia had made a face. If she was already authorized, forging additional authorization forms becomes a much murkier question. A prosecutor would ask, why forge something if you already had legal access? It doesn't make sense. It actually makes her look better, in a weird way. It suggests she may not have realized she needed to forge anything, because she genuinely believed she had the right to access the account. That was the piece that made my head hurt. Sarah's apparent guilt had become her best defense. You need to decide what you want to happen, Dr. Patel said now, bringing me back to her office. Because I'm hearing two different goals. On one hand, you want to recover the money for your other children. On the other hand, you want Sarah to acknowledge what she did and face consequences for it. Those two goals may be mutually exclusive. She was right, of course. If I pursued civil action against the bank, Sarah could claim vindication. If I tried to force Sarah to repay the money, I'd be asking her to compensate for a crime she could reasonably argue she didn't commit. Either path left me unsatisfied, but one path left me without my daughter entirely. I hadn't heard from Sarah in 4 days. Not since she'd walked out of the kitchen with that final comment about getting my memory checked. James and Emma had noticed her absence. Emma had asked if we'd had a fight. I told her that Sarah and I were taking some space. I didn't know how to explain that my eldest daughter had outsmarted me with the help of a bank's administrative failure, and that I couldn't figure out how to punch back. On Saturday morning, I received a text. Asterisk Dad, I talked to Mom's side of the family. Aunt Rebecca says she'd be happy to help with James and Emma's college fund if you end this witch hunt against me. She's willing to donate $30,000 if we can all just move past this. No police. No lawyers. Just family. Think about it, asterisk. I read it 3 times. Aunt Rebecca was Margaret's younger sister, living in Portland with her wealthy tech industry husband. I'd never discussed our financial situation with her. Sarah must have called her directly, presented her own version of events, and Rebecca, who had always been close to Sarah, had always seen her as the responsible eldest child, had apparently bought whatever narrative Sarah had constructed. The offer was brilliant. $30,000 would cover a significant portion of what Sarah had taken. It would solve the immediate problem of the other children's college funds. And it came with an implicit condition, accept this solution, and you accept that Sarah did nothing wrong. I called Patricia Chen back. It's a settlement offer, Patricia confirmed after I read her the text. An informal one. It's also somewhat manipulative, bringing a third party into the negotiation to apply social pressure. But legally, it's clean. If you accept money from Aunt Rebecca to cover the inheritance discrepancy, you're essentially forgiving the matter. Can Sarah use this against me somehow? I asked. Can she claim I admitted to making false accusations? Not directly. But it does undermine any legal position you might take later. Settlement agreements, even informal ones, can imply acceptance of a certain version of events. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Margaret's face looked at me from the photo on my nightstand. She'd been dead for 2 years. I wondered what she would tell me to do. Probably something about protecting the family, about not letting pride destroy what was left of it. But I also wondered if she would recognize what Sarah had become, the casual way she turned ethics and law into obstacles to navigate rather than principles to honor. That evening, I called James into my study. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to tell me the absolute truth. Okay, he said warily. Do you know anything about Sarah accessing your college fund? About the money she withdrew? James looked uncomfortable. I mean, yeah. I know she took some money. But Sarah said you guys had an agreement about it, so I figured it was okay. My chest tightened. She told you we had an agreement? Not exactly. She just said, like, Dad approved this. I didn't really think about it. The scope of what Sarah had done was expanding, blooming outward. It wasn't just the theft and the lies, it was the premeditation, the construction of false authority, the careful planting of permission that had never been granted. Okay, I said slowly. Thanks for being honest. After James left, I drafted a response to Sarah's text. Asterisk, your aunt's offer is generous. But I'm not looking for money. I'm looking for you to acknowledge what you did, asterisk. The response came within minutes. Asterisk, what I did was access money I had access to. That's not the story you want to tell, but it's the truth. And honestly, if you're going to keep obsessing over this, I'm going to have to distance myself. I can't have a relationship with someone who thinks I'm a criminal, asterisk. She was backing me into a corner with surgical precision. Accept her version of events, or lose her. Those were the only choices she'd left on the table. I didn't respond. And in the silence of that non-response, the real battle began. Hashtag chunk 5. The silence lasted 6 days. I learned, through that silence, that I was capable of ignoring my daughter's texts. I learned that my resolve could hold steady even when my phone buzzed with her name, even when I caught myself reaching for it before remembering why I shouldn't. I learned that silence could be its own form of conversation, every hour without response a small statement of intent. What I didn't learn was how to stop thinking about her. On the 7th day, Emma came to me with red-rimmed eyes and asked why Sarah wasn't coming to her volleyball tournament on Saturday. The tournament she'd mentioned months ago. The one all of us were supposed to attend. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't involve lying to a 14-year-old, so I said nothing, and Emma left the room disappointed in a way that felt worse than if she'd yelled at me. That afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but there was something in my chest that made me, some instinct telling me it mattered. Mr. Hammond. This is Detective Maria Santos with the Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling regarding a complaint filed by one Sarah Hammond on September 14th. My stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? A complaint alleging unauthorized access to inheritance accounts, identity theft, and forgery. Filed against you. For a moment, I couldn't process the words in the order she'd said them. They made sense individually. Together, they formed something impossible. I started, then stopped. When did this happen? The complaint was filed this morning. I'm calling because the allegations reference potential crimes committed by other parties, and protocol requires us to follow up. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you in person. Can you come in tomorrow? I made the appointment in a daze. After hanging up, I immediately called Patricia Chen, who picked up on the third ring with that familiar terseness that suggested she was in the middle of something. Patricia, Sarah filed a police report against me. She's claiming I committed unauthorized access, identity theft, and forgery. There was a pause. Then, of course she did. That's actually a smart move on her part. She's weaponizing the investigation before we could weaponize it against her. Walk me through it. I told her about the detective's call. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's what's happening, she said. Your daughter has realized that the evidence against her is circumstantial and legally vulnerable. So she's flipping the narrative. She's claiming you're the criminal, that you forged documents to frame her, that you're financially controlling and abusive. The inheritance discrepancy. She'll claim it was part of a larger pattern of coercive control. But that's insane. That's manipulative. Sure. But also, from a legal standpoint, it's actually quite effective. Because now any charges against her get tangled up in her counter-allegations. The detective has to investigate both claims. And in the meantime, you're no longer in a position of being the victim, you're in a position of being accused. What do I do? You come see me before you meet with the detective. Don't say anything to anyone, not Emma, not James, definitely not Sarah. And Mr. Hammond. Don't contact your daughter. Not in any form. Texts, calls, emails, none of it. Anything you say can be used against you now. After we hung up, I sat in my study with the door closed and tried to understand how my daughter had become someone willing to do this. Willing to file a false police report. Willing to accuse her father of crimes he didn't commit. Willing to weaponize her own siblings' safety in pursuit of avoiding consequences. This wasn't the Sarah who'd held Emma when she was born. This wasn't the Sarah who'd helped me plan Margaret's funeral. This was someone else wearing her face. My phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number, asterisk hi, this is Aunt Rebecca. Sarah told me about the police report. I want you to know that I believe her. Whatever issues exist in your relationship with her, filing a false accusation is not the way to handle it. I'm deeply disappointed in you, asterisk. I didn't respond. But I screenshotted it and sent it to Patricia with a note, she knows about the police report. Sarah told her. Patricia's response came back quickly, asterisk of course she did. Sarah's building her narrative with family members. She's positioning herself as the victim of an abusive, controlling father who's now trying to have her arrested out of spite. It's a good strategy, actually. Gets her family on her side, creates witnesses to her version of events, asterisk. That evening, I made the mistake of checking Sarah's Instagram for the first time in weeks. She'd posted a photo, her and Emma, arms around each other, both smiling. The caption read, asterisk so grateful for my sister. Family is everything. Can't wait for her big tournament this weekend. 2 hearts asterisk. It was a performance. A careful construction of normalcy and closeness, documented for an audience. A way of saying, asterisk I'm the good daughter. I'm the one who shows up. I'm the one who cares, asterisk. And worse, it was working. The comments were already piling up. Friends asking about Emma's tournament. People saying what a great older sister Sarah was. Aunt Rebecca had even commented, you're such a beautiful soul red heart. I wanted to comment myself. I wanted to post my own narrative, my own screenshots, my own evidence. I wanted to tell everyone what Sarah had actually done, what lies she was spreading, what accusations she'd filed. Instead, I closed the app. Patricia's words echoed, asterisk don't contact your daughter. Not in any form, asterisk. But what about not contacting everyone else? What about the slow, careful campaign of reputation destruction that was already underway? What about the detective I was meeting with tomorrow who would hear Sarah's version of events before hearing mine? Saturday morning, James asked when Sarah was picking him up. He had a debate competition. Sarah was supposed to drive him. I had to tell him that Sarah wasn't available. I didn't tell him why. I simply said we'd figure out another way to get him there, and watched his face fall with that same disappointed expression Emma's had worn. Two of my children, now, disappointed because of my eldest. That afternoon, I sat across from Patricia in her office and felt something inside me harden into a shape I didn't recognize. Something cold and strategic and absolutely determined. If I can't contact her, I said carefully, what if I contacted other people? What if I made sure everyone knew the truth before the investigation even started? Patricia studied me for a long moment. You're thinking about going public with the evidence. Should I? That depends, she said slowly, on whether you want to win a legal battle or win back your daughter. Because once you choose the first option, the second one becomes infinitely harder. I realized then that I hadn't yet decided which one I wanted. Chunk 6. The detective's office smelled like coffee and something else, institutional disinfectant, maybe, or just the accumulated weight of other people's disasters. Detective Santos was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-40s, with sharp eyes that didn't miss much. She'd already interviewed Sarah, she told me. Twice. Once officially, once informally when Sarah had come involuntarily with what Santos carefully called additional context. Your daughter has been very cooperative, Santos said, sliding a folder across the desk that I wasn't allowed to touch. She's provided bank statements, emails, text exchanges. She's given us access to her phone records. Did she explain how I supposedly forged her signature on accounts I set up with my own name? I asked. She said you had access to all her documents because you've always controlled her finances. That you used her accounts as extensions of your own, transferred money in and out as you saw fit, and that when she started asking questions, you blamed her for the withdrawals and threatened to involve the police. The statement was so precisely constructed, so perfectly engineered to align with modern language about financial abuse, that I almost had to admire it. Sarah had done her homework. She'd taken the real situation, the real crime, and inverted it, smoothed it, given it the texture of a familiar narrative that people understood and sympathized with. That's not what happened, I said. I believe you, Santos said, and something in the way she said it made me think she actually might. But believing you and proving you is going to require some legwork. I need to understand the full timeline. Everything from the moment you noticed the discrepancy. I walked her through it. The confusion when the numbers didn't add up. The phone call with the bank manager. The forged documents. The confrontation with Sarah. The Instagram posts. The ultimatum. The silence. I told her about the police report filed against me, about Patricia's warning not to contact Sarah, about the way my other children were already being caught in the crossfire. Santos took notes in a small spiral notebook, asking clarifying questions. When did the withdrawal start? How much was missing before you noticed? Did you have any written communication with Sarah about the accounts? Had you ever given her power of attorney or permission to access the funds? Each answer seemed to disappoint her slightly. The issue, she said carefully, setting down her pen, is that this is a civil matter being presented as a criminal one. Yes, the signatures appear forged. But without an explicit agreement that Sarah didn't have access rights, without written communication where she acknowledges the fraud, without a clear pattern of her attempting to hide the transactions, a defense attorney could argue this was a family dispute about inheritance allocation. She stole $75,000. I understand. But from her perspective, as a beneficiary of that inheritance, she might argue she was accessing funds that would ultimately be hers anyway. She's saying you never made the restrictions clear. She's saying you're punishing her for something you'd already implicitly allowed. It was brilliant, really. Horrifying and brilliant. By couching the theft in the language of family financial disputes, Sarah had moved it into the gray zone where criminal intent becomes difficult to prove. What about the social media posts? I asked. The public mocking. She called me a pathetic cheapskate. She's actively portraying me as financially abusive on Instagram while filing accusations of the same thing with your department. Those posts will help your case, Santos acknowledged. They suggest malice. But they're also going to be interpreted differently depending on who's reading them. Your daughter's friends will see them as evidence that she's been suffering under your control and is finally speaking up. Your friends will see them as evidence that she's ungrateful and dishonest. A jury, if this ever reaches that point, will depend on how they're presented and by whom. After I left the detective's office, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes without starting the engine. The sun was too bright, and the air inside the car was already getting stale and thick. I thought about what Patricia had asked, did I want to win a legal battle or win back my daughter? The distinction seemed cruel. Why should those be mutually exclusive? Why couldn't she simply face consequences for her actions and then we could rebuild? Why did accountability have to mean complete estrangement? But the truth was darker than that. The truth was that Sarah had already chosen her path the moment she forged that first signature. And then again when she mocked me online. And again when she filed a false police report rather than apologize. My phone buzzed. A text from James, *Dad, I have to catch the bus to the debate competition. I'm going to be late. Can you pick me up after and we can talk about it, *. I texted back immediately, *I'll be there. What time, *. 5:30 p.m. Thanks, Dad, *. I stared at those two words for a long time. Thanks, Dad. As if I'd done something good. As if driving my son to a competition after his older sister had refused was something to be grateful for. As if the baseline of parental responsibility had somehow become exceptional in a world where my eldest daughter was systematically dismantling our family structure. That evening, I picked James up from his school, and he climbed into the passenger seat with the particular exhaustion of a teenager who'd spent the day arguing about policy positions in front of judges. He talked about his debate round, about how his partner had misread a critical piece of evidence, about how they'd placed fourth instead of the first they'd expected. I'm sorry it didn't go the way you wanted, I said. Yeah, well. He shrugged. Sarah would have been here if she could, I think. She's been weird lately, but she's usually pretty good about this stuff. The casual assumption that Sarah's absence was involuntary, that my daughter couldn't possibly choose not to show up for him, landed like a punch. Patricia had been right. Sarah was building her narrative with family members. And I was bound by legal advice not to correct it. James, I need to talk to you about something. But I need you to understand that whatever I say, it's not because I want to hurt Sarah. It's because you deserve the truth. He tensed slightly. Is this about the inheritance thing? Sarah mentioned something about that. What did she say? That Dad was being controlling about money. That you wouldn't let her access her own inheritance. He paused. Is that not true? I realized then that I was standing at a crossroads. I could tell James the truth, pull out my phone, show him the bank records, explain the forged signatures, detail the theft. I could position myself as the victim and Sarah as the criminal. I could win my son's allegiance, at least temporarily. Or I could protect his relationship with his sister, even as she was poisoning his perception of me. It's complicated, I finally said. And I'm not going to put you in the middle of it. James looked at me with an expression that suggested he already felt thoroughly in the middle. #chunk7. The silence in the car after I said that felt like a physical thing, something heavy and suffocating that neither of us knew how to move around. James stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he wasn't sure he should say. Dad, he finally started, then stopped. Started again. I don't want to be in the middle. But I kind of am, aren't I? He wasn't wrong. And the fact that a 16-year-old could see that with such clarity made me want to put my fist through the steering wheel. You're right, I said. And I'm sorry for that. But I need you to know that whatever happens between your sister and me, it has nothing to do with how I feel about you. Or Michael. Or David. Sarah says you're trying to punish her because Mom left money and you're bitter about it. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back and they suddenly escaped. She says you've never let her forget that she's the oldest, like she owes you something just for existing. Is that what's happening? I pulled the car to the side of the road. We were on Maple Street, near the elementary school where all three of my older kids had spent their early years. The building was locked up now, summer break, the playground empty and somehow sadder for it. No, I said quietly. That's not what's happening. But I understand why she'd frame it that way. So you're not mad at her? I'm very mad at her. But it's not about the money. It's about the dishonesty. It's about her stealing from accounts that weren't hers to access, and then lying about it, and then lying to you and your brothers about why I'm upset. James picked at a thread on his debate team polo shirt. She said you're trying to make her repay you like she's a criminal. She said if Mom were alive, she'd never let you do this. That landed like a knife directly under my ribs. The invocation of his mother, of her name being used as a weapon against me. Sarah was smart. She knew exactly which buttons to press. Your mother, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, set up those accounts specifically so that each of you would have security. So that you'd all have choices when you were older. She would never have wanted any of you to steal from each other. She would never have wanted that money used for luxury purchases while your younger siblings watched. Michael doesn't care about. Michael is 13, James. He shouldn't have to care yet. And David is 11. They shouldn't have to worry about whether their future education, their future stability, is being undermined by their older sister's decisions. That's not fair to them. And it wasn't fair to me to manage. I put the car back in gear and continued driving. We were only a few blocks from home now, and I was conscious of the ticking clock. This conversation would end soon, and once it did, I wasn't sure when I'd get another chance to try to help him understand. The police came to talk to you? James asked quietly. The police came to talk to me, yes. Is Sarah going to get arrested? It was the question I'd been dreading. The question that, in asking it, made James complicit in the outcome no matter what I answered. I don't know, I said honestly. It depends on a lot of things. But James, I need you to hear this. Whatever happens with your sister is about her choices, not about punishment. If there are consequences, those are a direct result of what she decided to do. She's still our sister. Yes. She is. So you're not going to kick her out or anything. The question suggested that Sarah had been telling him I was capable of that. Had been painting me as someone volatile and vengeful, someone who would turn on family without hesitation. I'm not going to kick her out, I said. But I need her to understand that her actions have hurt this family. I need her to take responsibility for that. And I need her to stop lying, to you, to your brothers, to me, to the police. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always did, which felt wrong somehow. How could everything look normal when everything felt catastrophic? If she doesn't, James said carefully, if she doesn't take responsibility, what happens? Then we can't trust her. And a family without trust. I trailed off, because I couldn't finish that sentence without saying something too heavy for a 16-year-old to carry. That's pretty bad, James said. Yeah. It is. He unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't move to get out of the car. For what it's worth, I believe you. About the money thing. I don't think you'd invent it. That's too big. The validation was a relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. At least one of my children didn't think I was the villain in this narrative. At least there was that. Thank you, I said. I'm still going to talk to her though. I'm still going to try to figure out what's actually going on. I know. And you should. Just, be careful with the information people give you. Sometimes the most convincing lies are the ones that have little pieces of truth mixed in. After James went inside, I sat in the driveway for another few minutes, watching the house. The lights were on in the living room, Michael was probably in there, doing whatever it was 13-year-olds did when their world was falling apart. I wondered what Sarah had told him. I wondered how many of my children were actively believing a false version of me while I sat here trying to decide between my legal rights and my moral obligations. My phone rang. It was Patricia. I got a call from the DA's office, she said without preamble. Sarah's attorney filed a motion requesting that the charges be consolidated with a civil suit. She's offering to settle this through mediation rather than go to trial. What does that mean? It means she's nervous about something. Probably those Instagram posts. They make her motivations look questionable. So we won. We won, right? There was a pause on the other end of the line. You have leverage, Patricia said carefully. The question is what you do with it. Hashtag chunk 8. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in Patricia's office. Neutral ground. I'd spent the previous 72 hours in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of fatherhood while my mind circled obsessively around the decision I had to make. I could crush Sarah. The evidence was airtight. The Instagram posts showed her mockery, her entitlement, her complete lack of remorse. The bank records showed premeditation. Her attorney wouldn't even file for mediation if they didn't think they were losing badly. But crushing her wouldn't fix anything. On the morning of the mediation, I made pancakes. All 5 kids at the table, a rarity these days. Michael was on his phone. David barely touched his food. James watched me with the careful attention of someone who understood that something significant was about to happen. Sarah didn't come down until the others had finished, and when she did, she looked smaller somehow. Less polished. Her usual armor of designer clothes and calculated indifference had been replaced with sweatpants and what looked like exhaustion. We need to talk, I said. Before I go to the mediation. I'm coming to that, Sarah said flatly. I know. But first, we need to talk. Just us. The kitchen emptied. I heard Michael's bedroom door close upstairs, James pretending to look for something in the garage, David turning up the volume on whatever he was watching in the living room. They understood the gravity of the moment even if they didn't know exactly what it entailed. Sarah sat across from me at the table where I taught her to cut her food as a toddler, where she'd done her homework as a middle schooler, where we'd eaten countless meals as a family. Where my wife had made her famous birthday breakfasts every June for 28 years. I've been thinking about your mother a lot, I started. Please don't. Let me finish. I've been thinking about what she would want right now. And I think she'd want me to remember something. That you weren't always like this. You were a kind person. You were thoughtful. You cared about your brothers. You had integrity. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression remained guarded. That doesn't change what happened. No, it doesn't. But it means I don't think you're irredeemable. Which is where I was before I picked James up from debate practice. I was ready to press charges and watch you face criminal consequences. I was ready to let you hit rock bottom and stay there. So what changed? There was something almost desperate in her voice, a crack in the facade. James said something. He said that the most convincing lies have little pieces of truth mixed in. And he's right. You twisted something real, that I was stressed about money, that I was grieving your mother and sometimes that made me distant, into a narrative where you were the victim. Where stealing was justified. Where mocking me was deserved. I leaned forward. But the truth is, I made mistakes. I probably did focus too much on responsibility when you were growing up because you were the oldest and I needed you to help hold things together. I probably didn't always balance that with acknowledging what you were giving up. I should have talked to you about my grief instead of just assuming you understood. Sarah was crying now, quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. But, I continued, that doesn't excuse the theft. It doesn't excuse the lies. It doesn't excuse using your younger brother's futures as a piggy bank for luxury purchases. And it doesn't excuse trying to poison your siblings against me to cover your tracks. I know. Her voice was barely audible. The question now is what happens next. I can press charges. My attorney tells me I have a very strong case. You'd likely face felony charges given the amount and the forged signatures. You'd have a criminal record that would follow you for life. Your career prospects would be significantly limited. Your life would be materially harder going forward. I let that settle for a moment. Or, I said, we can do this differently. But it has to be real. Not a performance. Not another version of a lie. Real. Sarah looked up at me, her mascara streaked. I want you to repay every penny. Not because I'm punishing you. But because you need to understand that actions have consequences, and that the world doesn't owe you absolution just because you're sorry after you get caught. I want you to go to therapy, real therapy, not the kind where you're just trying to manipulate your therapist into validating you. I want you to understand why you thought this was acceptable, why you convinced yourself that lying was justified. How long do I have to repay it? She asked. 2 years. That's reasonable for someone your age to manage. You'll need to get a job. You'll need to contribute to household expenses. You'll need to actually be part of this family again instead of performing superiority from a distance. And if I can't, then charges get filed. And we both have to live with that. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll do it. You don't get to apologize yet, I said. Apologies come after you've demonstrated through sustained behavior that you actually understand what you did wrong. Right now, you just understand that you got caught. We'll see if you actually become someone worth apologizing to. The mediation was a formality after that. Sarah's attorney initially tried to negotiate the terms, but Sarah herself asked for a recess and told her attorney to step aside. I want to take responsibility, she said simply. I'll repay the full amount. I'll enter into whatever agreement my father thinks is appropriate. Patricia looked at me with something like surprise. That was 2 months ago. Sarah got a job at a marketing firm, entry level, far below what her degree probably qualified her for, but she didn't complain. Every 2 weeks, she transfers money into the inheritance account. She's in therapy. She's quiet at dinner, and not in the way that suggests anger, but in the way that suggests she's actually listening to her brothers for the first time in years. Last week, she asked Michael to help her with something in her car, and when I heard him laugh, actually laugh, I felt something in my chest unlock. We're not fixed. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and I'm not naive enough to think one difficult conversation and 2 months of good behavior means we're going to pretend the last year didn't happen. But my daughter is still my daughter. And more importantly, she's becoming someone I recognize again. That's not nothing. That might be everything.